In the smoke-heavy streets of 1920 Chicago, where brass horns cried from underground clubs and the echo of gunfire blended seamlessly with laughter and applause, the life of Viola O'Banion unfolded not merely as the story of a gangster's wife, but as a slow-burning tragedy shaped by devotion, denial, grief, and defiance. This was a city that devoured the careless and rewarded the ruthless, a place where power wore tailored suits and death arrived quietly, often wrapped in flowers. Viola did not choose this world, but once inside it, she would fight it, love it, and ultimately be broken by it. Helen Viola O'Banion was born on March 27, 1901, in Chicago, into a strict Irish Catholic household that believed discipline and distance were the only defenses against moral decay. She was one of 4 children, raised with prayer, structure, and a constant reminder that the city beyond their doorstep was dangerous, especially for a girl with curiosity in her eyes and independence in her posture. Her parents watched Chicago change, watched liquor and money and violence seep into every corner, and they feared their daughter would be swallowed whole. So they did what many parents of the time believed was salvation. They sent her away. Boarding school in Iowa was meant to protect her, to sand down her sharp edges and replace ambition with obedience. Instead, it sharpened her hunger. Distance did not dull her fascination with life, it intensified it. When Viola returned to Chicago on vacation, she stepped into the city like someone breathing after being held underwater too long. The noise, the motion, the danger, it all felt intoxicating. And it was during this return, at just 19 years old, that she met Dean O'Banion. Dean was 29, confident, impeccably dressed, and impossible to ignore. He did not present himself as a criminal. He didn't need to. To Viola, he was a florist, a businessman with dirt under his nails and charm in his smile. In truth, he was already deeply embedded in the criminal machinery of Prohibition-era Chicago, an Irish-born mob leader whose bootlegging empire generated fortunes and whose enemies tended to disappear. He was ruthless when necessary, generous when useful, and calculating at all times. Dean O'Banion had survived what many did not. He was tied to roughly 20 murders, yet remained untouched by the law. He controlled men, neighborhoods, and ballot boxes with equal ease. Politicians who relied on his influence conveniently lost interest in his criminal activities. To the public, he was whispered about. To Viola, he was attentive, gentle, and strangely domestic. Their relationship moved quickly, too quickly for caution to intervene. Dean proposed with the urgency of a man who knew tomorrow was never guaranteed. They married on February 5, 1921, inside the Basilica of Our Lady of Sorrows, a place of soaring arches and solemn vows. Viola walked down the aisle in a simple dress, her hair cropped in a modern bob, unaware of how prophetic the church's name would become. Dean stood waiting in a dark 3-piece suit, calm, composed, every inch the man who believed the world bent to his will. Their wedding night unfolded in luxury at the Drake Hotel, a glittering symbol of Chicago's wealth overlooking Lake Michigan. From there, they escaped to California, where the sun washed away the city's grime and the future seemed malleable. When they returned, they moved into a grand 12-room apartment near the lake. For Viola, it was paradise. Inside their home, Dean played the role of perfect husband with startling precision. He did not drink. He did not smoke. He came home on time. He played music for her on an extravagant player piano, listened to records with her, laughed easily, and treated her with a tenderness that made rumors feel absurd. He worked at Schofield's flower shop during the day, arranging bouquets, answering calls, returning home with a fresh flower pinned to his lapel. Viola told herself that this was who he truly was. Everything else was noise. There was only one rule Dean insisted upon: no questions. Viola agreed. Love, she believed, meant trust. And trust meant silence. Sometimes, the truth intruded in ways that could not be ignored. A trip to Denver resulted in the purchase of 3 Thompson submachine guns, compact, efficient, terrifying machines capable of unleashing hundreds of bullets in minutes. Viola made room for them in their home as if they were awkward pieces of furniture rather than tools of mass murder. She did not ask why. She did not ask when they would be used. She folded denial around herself like armor. She still dreamed of children, of a future that looked nothing like the one forming around her. Everything unraveled at Friar's Inn, a basement club where jazz musicians played beneath the Chicago Loop and gangsters conducted business between drinks. One night, Dean arrived with his entourage, including Mike Carrazza and his wife. It was there Viola met Margaret Collins, a blonde woman whose reputation was whispered with fear. Men who loved Margaret had a habit of dying. Whether coincidence or curse, no one could say. A careless comment turned into an insult. An insult became a slap. The slap triggered chaos. Tables overturned. Voices rose. Weapons were nearly drawn. Only the unspoken understanding of mutual destruction prevented bloodshed. The night ended without gunfire, but it planted a seed of hatred that would not die. In the weeks that followed, Mike Carrazza narrowly escaped assassination. Police predicted retaliation, half-joking that Dean's flower business would soon thrive on funerals. Then, on November 10th, it happened. Dean O'Banion was ambushed in broad daylight. 6 bullets tore through his body. He fell among his flowers, face first, surrounded by the symbols of the life he pretended was harmless. Viola learned of his death the way many mob wives did, suddenly, brutally, without explanation. She followed his coffin through the freezing air, numb, disoriented, barely aware of the crowd around her. Margaret Collins stood nearby, equally devastated. The press went wild. Police chased theories they already knew would go nowhere. The truth, as always, sank beneath layers of silence. Dean's funeral became a spectacle unlike anything Chicago had seen. 40,000 mourners passed his open casket. Flowers flooded the funeral home until rooms overflowed. Police stood on edge, ready to shoot at the slightest provocation. Rival gangs attended side by side, restrained by timing rather than peace. Among the floral tributes sat a modest basket signed by Al Brown, a known alias of Al Capone, Dean's greatest rival and likely executioner. For Viola, the funeral was only the beginning of her suffering. The church refused to grant Dean a funeral mass or burial in consecrated ground. Cardinal Mundeline's decision devastated her. She could accept death. She could not accept damnation. Months later, she secretly had Dean's body exhumed and reburied near high-ranking clergy, erecting a massive obelisk adorned with angel wings. As the years passed, Chicago itself seemed eager to forget Viola O'Banion, yet the city never truly released her. Streets changed names, buildings rose and fell, speakeasies became offices, and the echoes of jazz slowly faded into nostalgia, but the shadow of that era lingered in the cracks of sidewalks and the memories of those who had lived through it. Viola carried that shadow with her wherever she went. Even when she left the city behind, Chicago lived inside her, an unhealed wound stitched together with defiance and memory. In the months following Dean's death, Viola discovered that grief was not a single emotion but a rotating storm. Some days it arrived as numbness, a hollow quiet that made even breathing feel unnecessary. Other days it came as fury, sharp and uncontrollable, aimed at anyone who dared to speak Dean's name with judgment in their voice. She replayed moments endlessly in her mind, Dean sitting in his slippers, adjusting the radio dial, humming along to a pianist, Dean returning home with flowers pinned to his coat, Dean promising nothing except presents. The city called him a criminal. The church called him unworthy. To Viola, he was simply her husband. What tormented her most was not the violence of his death, but the silence that followed it. No answers. No justice. No acknowledgement of the man she knew. The investigation dissolved as quickly as it had formed. Witnesses forgot what they had seen. Leads evaporated. In Chicago, murders like Dean's were not tragedies to be solved, they were inconveniences to be absorbed. The city moved on, and Viola was expected to do the same, but she could not. Every institution she had trusted had failed her. The police offered speculation instead of truth. The church offered condemnation instead of mercy. Society offered curiosity instead of compassion. In response, Viola rejected restraint entirely. Her reckless driving was not simply rebellion, it was a declaration. Each speeding ticket, each arrest, each shouted insult was a refusal to be small, a refusal to disappear quietly as widows were expected to do. Newspapers framed her as unhinged, a spectacle, a fallen woman unable to cope with loss. In reality, she was a woman refusing to accept a world that demanded her silence. Those who encountered her during this period described a restless energy about her, a volatility that could turn from laughter to rage in seconds. She dressed well, carried herself with confidence, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion. Sleep came rarely. When it did, it was filled with fractured dreams of music cut short by gunfire. She drank more than she once had, though never to excess, never enough to dull her awareness. Viola wanted to feel everything, even the pain. Especially the pain. Eventually, survival required distance. Chicago was a graveyard of memories, every street corner a reminder. Viola left the city, first temporarily, then permanently. She remarried, once, then again, each marriage an attempt at normalcy rather than passion. These unions lacked the intensity of her life with Dean. There were no secrets, no danger, no music echoing through rooms paid for with blood money. Safety, she learned, was quieter than love. It was also lonelier. She adopted a daughter, a decision that seemed to ground her more than any marriage had. Motherhood gave her a purpose that did not rely on defiance. In caring for another life, Viola found moments of peace that had eluded her since Dean's death. She rarely spoke of her past. When she did, it was selectively, carefully, as though too much truth might shatter the fragile stability she had built. Those who knew her later in life described her as private, guarded, and deeply intelligent. She followed the news obsessively, especially anything related to crime or the church, though she rarely commented aloud. Chicago gangsters became legends, their stories romanticized, their names recycled into myth. Dean O'Banion's name appeared occasionally, often distorted, simplified into villainy. Viola never corrected the record. Some battles, she had learned, were unwinnable. When she died on November 17, 1966, there were no headlines, no crowds, no flowers flooding rooms. Her death passed quietly, presumed natural, barely noted outside a small circle of acquaintances. And yet, in retrospect, her life tells a story far larger than the sum of its public moments. Viola O'Banion was a woman who existed at the fault line between love and violence, faith and rebellion, devotion and denial. She did not wield a gun. She did not order hits. But she lived inside a world shaped by those who did, and she paid the price for loving one of them. Her legacy is not found in criminal records or police files, but in the defiance of her choices. She loved a man the world condemned and refused to abandon him even in death. She challenged the authority of the church not with words, but with action. She refused to fade into invisibility when widowhood demanded it. In an era when women were expected to endure quietly, Viola made noise. In the end, her life resembles the city that shaped it, beautiful and brutal, generous and unforgiving, alive with contradictions. Chicago in the 1920s was a place where jazz mingled with gunfire, where morality bent beneath money, and where survival required compromise. Viola O'Banion navigated that world not as a passive observer, but as a participant, a woman whose emotions burned brighter than the violence surrounding her. Her story remains a reminder that history is not only written by kings, criminals, or lawmen, but also by those who loved them, survived them, and refused to be erased by them. Viola did not conquer Chicago. She endured it. And in doing so, she became something rarer than a legend of crime. She became a legend of resilience. And so, as the echoes of jazz finally faded and the streets of Chicago learned new rhythms, Viola O'Banion slipped quietly into history, leaving behind no gunshots, no indictments, no criminal empire. What remained was something far more unsettling and far more human. A woman who loved without caution, who believed without proof, and who fought institutions far larger than herself armed with nothing but stubborn devotion. In a city where men made their names through violence and fear, Viola made hers through refusal to forget, refusal to submit, refusal to let the world decide what her love had been worth. Chicago remembers its gangsters in headlines and legends, their names carved into crime books and whispered in documentaries. Viola's name is spoken less often, yet her presence lingers between the lines of their stories, in the quiet spaces where grief lives and loyalty refuses to die. She was not innocent, nor was she cruel. She was simply human in an inhuman world, trying to preserve something tender inside a city built to destroy it. In the end, Viola O'Banion did not win against Chicago, against the mob, or against the church. But she did something rarer. She endured. And in a world where survival itself was an act of defiance, that endurance became her final victory.